Once you've downloaded all your files and re-uploaded all your files, then you reconfigure the database in the wp-config file. And after that, then after that it should work. Everything should work as long as you got the database up, the files are up, it should work. And if for some reason it doesn't work, the first step would be to go to WP debug and turn it to true. And then WordPress will return errors. And that makes it a whole lot easier to troubleshoot. Well, let's talk about security a bit. Most attacks are made by bots. And what that means is that every site is vulnerable. Even if you have a website where you sell your own handmade soap and you have 50 visitors a month, you're still vulnerable to attacks of intrusion because they're not made by individuals trying to break into your site, but they're made by automated scripts that are scouring the internet for vulnerabilities. So I would say golden rule of security is don't trust user data. Don't ever trust user data. You always want to treat it with some suspicion, and any information that the user inserts into your site, you want to screen and clean and prevent any type of malicious activity. An SQL injection is when a hacker tries to either access information from a database or insert information into a database through a form or through a URL, something like that. So, for example, this is the raw link that WordPress would use with a query string. Now, it doesn't display it like this. You see a clean URL, but because it's using the permissions file to convert the clean URL into a query string like this. So you have a key value pair in here, and a hacker will try to manipulate a string like this or a key value pair like this to insert database commands, or they might try it through some form, something like that. So I have built hundreds of WordPress sites, and I have managed more than that. I have never seen an SQL injection site in a WordPress site. It's pretty strong against this type of attack. Even sites that are old and haven't been maintained well, I still have never seen an SQL injection attack on a WordPress site. Although changing the prefix is one thing that you can do. We talked about that, changing the database prefixes is one thing that you can do to make it a little harder to make an SQL injection attack, because if the hacker does not know the names of the database tables, it's harder to penetrate them. Email injection, on the other hand, is extremely common. What happens here is a hacker will insert headers, header commands inside through a mail form. And what the intention is typically here, what they're trying to do is they want to hijack your mail server and use it to send out spam. It's a very common attack. It's very easy to block. The way you block it is with a CAPTCHA or some other type of email test. So, the old-fashioned CAPTCHAs were these funny, was the text that's hard to read, and then you type in what it says. The problem with those is that it's hard, that the bots couldn't read them, but people had a hard time reading them too, and they can be very frustrating. There's other types of tests that you'll see. This is Google's Recaptcha. This is a very effective one. This is the older version of it. The newer version of it, there's an invisible CAPTCHA. They don't even need to click. Oops, where'd it go? They don't even need to click this box. It just automatically knows if they are. It just automatically knows if they are a real person or not. And there are times when it's not sure. Like there might be times when can't really tell if you're a real person. Maybe your activity has been a little suspicious, and that's when it will present some type of test. So the invisible reCAPTCHA is great because it doesn't, there's no barrier for the user to access the form. So this is a great test to use, the Recaptcha here. The only kind of slightly annoying thing about the Recaptcha is that anywhere where it's being used, it will place this badge on the lower corner of the page. Not a terribly big deal, but it's there. Okay, let's go back up here. Cross-site scripting attacks. We've already looked at what those are when we looked at the search fields. So that's basically a way when the hacker is able to insert scripts or JavaScript or HTML into your site and then use that to, somehow trick users into giving them data or something like that, something of that nature. A brute force attack. This is something that WordPress is susceptible to. This would be like, for example, if a hacker bombards your login page with thousands of attempts and tries to guess the password. The first thing that is going to block most of these attacks is by not using a username of admin and by using a strong password. So these two things themselves will block most brute force attacks. There are some other things that you can do, like for example, you've probably seen these. You can limit the number of times an attempt can be made. You can also, what you could do also is you could just, like with each attempt, you could put a timer on so they have to wait like increasing amounts of time between attempts, because that's the whole point of a brute force attack is that you are trying like thousands and thousands and thousands of making thousands of attempts. So if you slow down their ability to make these attempts, it's going to make it pretty much impossible to make it. You combine that with just limiting the number of attempts they can make. That should take care of that as well. A man-in-the-middle attack is something that could come in, if you think about e-commerce, that's where I would think of this coming into play with WordPress. So, for example, if you submit a credit card number, a hacker could intercept the transmission that the user is making from the credit card to the credit card, to the credit card service, and then steal the credit card number. Especially if the user is like in a public place, like let's say they're in a cafe. It's very easy to intercept a transmission. The way around this is to use the HTTPS protocol, a secure protocol, and the encrypted protocol will block most of these attacks. And by the way, you never want to store secure data on a WordPress site. You never want to secure credit card numbers or social security numbers, anything like that. WordPress is just not designed to be that secure. It's generally secure, but it's not designed for that type of purpose. So with an e-commerce site, what you would be doing is you wouldn't store all the credit card information on your site. You would be storing it on a service that handles the transaction. And there are services out there that will even, you could have something where it remembers the customer, so they don't have to enter you could have like they log in and they don't have to enter their credit card number every time, but still the transaction of that credit card number is handled by a third-party service, which is really specialized in handling secure information. Okay, and so I already spoke to some of this already, the Recaptcha on the email forms. For password guessing, you can use a Recaptcha in the login page too. That's a great thing to do. You can block access to the admin panel, so you can block access in a number of ways. You could block it by IP address, so that only certain people at certain IP addresses can access the admin panel. You could turn off the admin panel at certain times of day. Like you could say that, between like 10 p.m. and 9 a.m., nobody can access the admin panel. You have to be careful with some of these things because, like, for example, if you block the admin panel by IP address, and let's say you're out of town and you want to get into your WordPress site, it might block you and prevent you from getting into your site. So you have to be careful with some of this stuff. So file uploading. So the one thing you want to be careful of with file uploading is the Gmod settings. You never want the Gmod to be fully open. You want to have the appropriate settings on the folders and files, and so you never want them to be fully open. And by default, they won't be. They won't be unless you've adjusted them yourself. Another extremely common hack of WordPress sites is comment posting. So what hackers will do is they will insert comments into your comment form. They'll flood your comment form with comments, and they will include links to their, what they're going to do is they're going to include links to their spam sites, so their pharma site, their Viagra sites, this type of thing. They're gonna flood your site, your comments with links to this stuff. Sometimes they can be kind of devious, and it's really kind of devious because it can really sometimes clients like super excited because they're like, oh my god, I got all these great reviews, all these great posts on my blog, I got like 100 posts, and they'll say, oh, I love your blog, I love this, it's so wonderful, it's such unique content. But really what those are spam attacks. They're not real users, and what they'll do is that they will insert links into these it's some kind of black hat SEO, and I doubt it really even works that well, but I guess it works enough that they do it. Okay, and then another very common attack that you'll see is what the hackers typically try to do is they will try to get into the admin somehow and upload a file, which they will then use to modify theme files or change the htaccess file. So if they change the htaccess file, what they tend to do is make the whole site or certain pages on the site redirect to their own spam site, their own like pharma site. Another thing that they'll do is they'll insert a file which will modify all the theme files, and they'll insert some code at the top like this. So this is what a hacked file looks like. They tend to look like this. These are base64 encoded, and that makes it difficult to search for them. It makes it difficult to locate the source of the hack, although they're actually pretty easy to find if you know where to look for them. You can see right here it says base64 decode. So this is encrypted or encoded, not encrypted, it's encoded, and then it would like switch the content on your site to their site. Now something especially devious that they do, that you kind of have to admire at the degree of deviousness. What they will do is what these hackers will do is they will check the source of the viewer. So what they'll do is they will, if the viewer is, if the viewer on the site is a person, it will show the site as normal. But if the visitor is a bot, like for example a search bot, like a Google indexing bot, it'll show the alternate content with all their links to their pharma ads. And so this is pretty devious because you'll go on the site and it will look totally normal. You won't notice that there's anything wrong with the site until you look at the search results and you see that it has like Viagra, like your site is like all the titles on your site are about selling Viagra or some other type of pharma product. That's how you know that your site's been hacked. So this is also a pretty easy hack to clean up. You just go through all it's pretty easy to identify the garbage code. So you also want to look for any file names that look weird. Just clean it out, erase it, and then update your site. You should be good to go. So some prevention, update WordPress regularly, at least once a month. Also recommend using offsite backup. So there's a great plugin called Updraft that you can install, and you can hook Updraft up to an external backup system like for example, Google Drive or an external FTP server. It has a variety of different ways that you can use a third-party backup, and then the site will be regularly backed up externally, and that's good for a number of reasons. So if the site's been hacked, it makes it really easy to then reinstate it from a backup. So that's one reason. Another reason why I'd really recommend offsite backups on WordPress is because sometimes people lose their sites for a couple of reasons. One reason would be that just a billing problem. Sometimes people have these websites and they might have the registrar bill, the registrar might be GoDaddy, but the site is hosted on DreamHost and they forget, and maybe the person that registered the account no longer works for the company, and nobody's receiving these emails saying that their account's past due, and then the site disappears and they lose the entire site. I've seen that happen more than once. Sometimes the host just messes up. Sometimes the host I've seen this happen too, and on major hosts that you would think would be reliable, sometimes they just screw up and they lose the site and it's gone. And so that's why it's good to have offsite backup, because if something like that happens, you're protected. Remove abandoned installations. So you want to, it's often tempting if you do a redesign, you'll want to keep a backup on the server in case you want to, go back to the old installation for some reason. I say from experience, there's a tendency for people to want to keep their old installations, but I've never actually seen anybody actually want to go back to it. What you can do is you can just download it and save it to your computer. Package it, put it in a zip file, save it to your computer, and archive it that way. But you don't want to keep abandoned installations on a server because they're just not being maintained, and then they become vulnerable to being attacked. And if somebody attacks an old script, it doesn't just make that old archive vulnerable, but actually if a hacker gets into that old site, they can then attack other sites on the server. So it's actually very dangerous to have abandoned scripts on a site. You want to install an SSL certificate. Quite easy to do with DreamHost. If you have the host install the SSL certificate, it's usually very, very easy. It's not that difficult to install it yourself, but there's a bit of a process to it. And then install iTheme Security, something I'd suggest, and WordFence. These are both good web security plugins. You go through and check all the settings off that you want on those. Run through all the settings. Those are both good. With security plugins, or any type of functional plugin like that, so for example, a security plugin, another type of functional plugin would be a caching plugin or some type of performance plugin. With any of these types of plugins, you want to make sure that you don't have two plugins doing the same things, because then you could end up with conflicts that'll cause problems for you. So that's something I would keep in mind with a security plugin. Just make sure you don't have plugins doing duplicate things. Because who knows what they'll do? Who knows what they'll do when they're all working? When they're all working independently. So good luck completing your sites, wrapping everything up. If something does come up and you're not sure how to address it, feel free to reach out to me. But I don't really think you need step-by-step instructions for this week's tasks, because I think you're all clever enough to work your way through them, generally speaking.